Introducing the one, the only, the incomparable, weighing in at
Like 170.
like 170.
Yeah.
Fucking Tommy Refenes.
This is great. I can't see anybody. All right. Oh, did you guys hear that? That was my insulin pump. Oh yeah, so I changed the name of the talk because whatever. So yeah, Colin introduced me. I'm the guy that made Super Meat Boy. So you've played it. Wow. It's weird to run into people that have played it. Yeah, I'm Tommy. I'm Meat Boy, Indie Game the Movie. The media likes to call me and Team Meat. So I'm kind of hoping that this talk is going to be super obvious and really boring to most people because I feel like everything I'm going to talk about, like, you should just be, yeah, of course. No, why wouldn't you do this kind of stuff? So for those of you that are going to be super bored, I'm sorry. But this is more for the people that are maybe like just sort of starting out and just trying to get like their bearings and everything, wanting to start out making games and everything. And this talk is mainly directed to them. And it's all about working with your friends. And me from 10 years ago, if I would have been in your situation and there would have been some guy up here talking about working with your friends, I would have tuned it out because I'm like, well, I'm super easy to work with and all my friends are awesome and there's not going to be anything that could possibly go wrong that I couldn't fix later. That's dumb. Don't do that. So like, if you're sort of thinking that right now, just take this 20 minutes or probably like 17 and a half minutes at this point and just let it soak in a little bit. And kind of as I'm going through this, everything is told from the perspective of the person that's being marginalized or sort of screwed over. Because the people that are either intentionally or unintentionally doing this, they never fully realize what they're doing. So let's begin. That's an American TV show called Friends. Pretty relevant to the talk. But yeah, so why do we work with friends? Well, you already know you get along. And, you know, when you work together, you're spending a whole bunch of time together. And why would you want to spend a bunch of time with somebody you don't like? So, you know, you already know you get along, so that's already a plus. You tend to have similar goals because, you know, as you're kind of growing up, and like the games industry is sort of like a childhood adult industry where a lot of the childhood passion gets flooded into like your adulthood ambitions. Like I had a friend, John, I never actually worked with him, but like all through fourth grade, you know, you're talking about like what your version of Battletoads is gonna be. And even back then, this was like in the 90s when Super Nintendo and Genesis were fighting. We were like, oh, it's so stupid. Why can't Sonic be on Nintendo? And like, look at us. We planned it. We figured it out. But you know, you have these sort of similar goals and everything. And like a good working relationship is like a bunch of hard work, but like a bunch of like laughter and like good times because you're gonna have such a terrible time while you're working. You might as well laugh a little bit. Yeah, and a big thing is like, you know, your friends are gonna have your back. Like during Meat Boy development, like at the very end, it's very much piled on the programmer, which was me. And you know, I would wake up, I would fix all the bugs in TCR for Xbox, and then I would go to bed and I'd wake up and there would be 100 more bugs. And like during that time, Ed would sort of like, you know, it's a teeter-totter. He would bring me back up to like the level of sanity where I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is gonna maybe work out. And it did. And yeah, your friends probably aren't going to screw you over, because they're your friends. But you have to be aware of something I like to call the group project effect. See this kid? He's all alone on a teeter-totter because his friends abandoned him. So I don't know. I don't know how it works everywhere, but when you're around 12 or 13, teachers get the bright idea that it's time to teach you teamwork. And that's great. You need to learn teamwork and everything, but inevitably it kind of always gets just totally screwed up. So let me give you my middle school story example. I had a social studies paper to write, and it was the time to do the group project, and it was like, I don't even remember what the paper was about, but it was like the teacher put us in a whole bunch of groups, and these were all like kind of my friends, not my best friends or anything, but people that I'd had to birthday parties and stuff, so they were friends. So, roles were made. I had to do this period, he had to do this, Sean had to do this, blah, blah, blah. We went all the way through, and it was like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. And Monday we got the assignment, Wednesday it was like the update, and Friday we were supposed to turn it in. So Monday, get everything together. Wednesday, I have all my stuff ready, and my group has nothing ready. And me being the kid that's like, I don't want to fail, I'm like, oh my God, so what do we do? And I'm talking to my friends, and they're like, well, you can write this part, and you can help me write this part, because they know I'm going to work. So the day before the project was due, I was staying up all night, and I was typing and typing and typing. And my mom, lucky I have a good mom, saw me doing this and actually went into the school and talked to my teacher, Mr. Pierce, and was like, hey, he's typing up everybody's. And Mr. Pierce was like, don't worry about it. I'll deal with the rest of them. And so that sort of worked out, where I still made a good grade and the group made a bad grade. But that's not how real life works, because there is no Mr. Pierce that's going to understand that your group is terrible, and there is no mom that's going to go, hey, no, your programmer didn't optimize that. That's okay. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. So, yeah, you have to watch out for the middle school stuff. So when you get in a situation where you have a group and the group sort of screws you over, you always have to assume ignorance over malice, because it's human instinct to do as little as possible and gain as much as possible. That's built into our DNA. And when something like that happens, where you have one person that's doing everything, it's not necessarily malice in the case of friends. It's just an inequality of empathy. And that kind of sucks. Other people don't see that you're being marginalized, so everything just sort of, they don't actually see it, so they don't empathize with your situation. So you kind of get into these hurt feelings and weird situations where people are feeling betrayed and everything. I have another story. The first game I was making after my industry job, I was doing it with a friend, and through no fault of his, when work got a little stressful, he sort of broke down a little bit. And this was right as we were trying to get our agreements together, how we would be working together, because we were talking to Microsoft and everything. And at that point, it just sort of all fell apart, because I had been doing more and more work, taking on his workload, and I'm like, hey, this can't be a 50-50 thing, because I'm doing all this work and it's not fair. Luckily, we're still friends, because it was just an extraordinary situation, but it tends to happen a lot. So you don't want to hurt feelings, you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and you don't want your feelings hurt, so how do you not do that? And then that's that picture that got ruined. So it's always better to do stuff in the beginning, very, very beginning. You want to be more proactive than retroactive or reactive or anything. Time machines aren't real, so you can't use them, so they're not real. You can't have them. You can't go back in time and be like, oh, no, you know what, we should change this. No, you need to be upfront and honest. Legal agreements, you have to get those. And I put the thing about the prenup because there's kind of a stigma when it comes to doing agreements with people, that it's just bad intentions or something. And that's not really the case. And if you think like getting an agreement, like a legal agreement drawn up is a bad thing, like stop thinking that. Because it's easy to think like, oh, you want me to sign this? Well, you think I'm gonna screw you over? And it's like, no, it's more like you can't predict the future. And legal agreements aren't so much for what will happen, it's just what might happen. So always get your agreements. You always want to be fair with like the people. I'm sorry, this thing keeps going off. You always want to be fair with like your friends and everything. That's like a stupid bullet point. Be fair with your friends, guys. You know. So, but yeah, like but being fair is like, don't pile everything on them. Don't take everything. You know, if you think you need like a producer or something, get a producer. Like talk about it beforehand. Don't try to squeeze one in later. And most of all, like when you're just starting out, your friends, like talking and working things out should be the easiest part of game development. And if you're going into it and you're thinking, oh well, you know, he does work, but he doesn't work as hard as I do, bring it up, like, you know, and talk to your friends and, you know, sort of get this worked out. So yeah, it came up from the bottom. So when you're talking to your friends and you're just starting out, a couple of things to actually talk about that I've found are very important. It's very important to define roles. A lot of your roles are automatically going to be defined because, you know, programmer, designer, sound guy, artist, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have those roles. And I feel like a lot of the time you just stop at that. But when you're doing something as a hobby, that's fine, but hobbies can very quickly turn into like giant businesses. And then it's like, well, who takes care of like making sure the accounting is right? Who takes care of like adding new vendors? Who takes care of this? Who takes care of all this paperwork? And, you know, take that and when you're first starting out, try to divide that up in a fair way and acknowledge that it might happen in the future. So try to address it early on. And while you're doing that, make sure that in your agreement you have a way to sort of refine those roles as like the partnership evolves and like the game evolves. Like you don't want to be in a situation where it's always like 50-50 and then like somebody just decides they don't want to make games with you anymore, or they decide like, oh, I want to do less, or I want to hire this assistant to help me out. Like, it kind of like that can lead to some pretty bad situations where you're wondering why, you know, why am I doing all this work? They're doing less, you know. So make it so you can redefine those roles at any time. And this is all like super easy stuff that can be in a partnership agreement. That's just no-brainer, costs almost nothing for a lawyer to draw it up. Yeah. So and when you're talking about this and when you're trying to get your roles all together, never do anything that you don't want to do. And that kind of just goes for just relationships in general, doesn't it? Like, you don't want to start out a marriage and be like, yeah, sure, I'll do the dishes. And then, like, a year later, you're like, I don't want to do dishes anymore. It's like, well, you've been doing them for 2 years. So that might be a bad example. But basically, though, the idea is like, you know, you're defining yourself, you're defining your roles. Don't be the guy that does the accounting and the producing and this and this and that, and then like 6 months in go, oh, we need somebody else for that, because that sucks. Oh yeah, and when ownership changes, like compensation should change. Like if you're doing all this stuff and your job for 5 years doesn't change, and the other person, their job reduces, there should be a way to make it so this person that's still constantly doing everything doesn't, like, you know, feel like they're being taken advantage of by this side that's, you know, giving up some of their work. And yeah, this is kind of like get contracts. And like when we're working with friends, we tend to do something along the lines of like, yeah, no, this is how it's going to be, and we just have this sort of verbal agreement. Well, verbal agreements are bullshit. They're terrible because like I have a pretty good memory. I can't remember anybody's name ever. I'm very sorry. But I can remember what you were wearing, what you were working on, all this stuff. But if I, for example, like if I had a contractor And they were, I said, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars to do something. This guy's my friend or something. I'm like, I'm going to give you this much. Project finishes. I give him that much. Project explodes. And then he's like, well, hey, I think you should pay me some more. And I'm like, well, we've already agreed to this. That doesn't matter because it was just a verbal agreement. And they can go and say, well, I still own all this stuff, or I don't own this, or you don't own that. And because you don't have anything in writing, it becomes very, very odd at that point. And that's when lawyers get involved, and it's terrible. So even if it's not drafted by a lawyer, just get something on paper that says this, 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 and this. Like, it's all about just defining things. So yeah. If you get to this point and you're talking to your friends and it's not going very well, because a lot of this stuff can be viewed as confrontational when you're just starting out. And it can also be viewed as super unimportant because it's no, we're just supposed to be making a game. And it's yeah, I know we're supposed to be making a game, but we also need to make sure that all of us are protected in the future, when we move forward. And, if our game does well, we just need to make sure everything is defined. If you get to that point and nothing is working out, think about just not teaming up with this group of friends or whatever. Because a thing that's kind of hard to realize, and I had it written down really cool here, but you go into these things thinking, and I did, and I'm very guilty of this. You go into these things and you think, everything's gonna be all right. If the game is super successful, everything's gonna be just fine because there will be nothing in the way of making stuff work out. And that's a dangerous thing to think because people don't really change in that way, and you're not gonna actually change anybody with a situation like success. If anything, it's actually gonna make stuff worse. And that's something I think people should really try to think about and try to avoid, because when you're working with your friends, and it is great working with friends, but the worst thing in the world is being mad at a friend for something they don't realize that they're doing. And if it comes up and you bring it up to them even after the fact and it doesn't exactly come through as hey, I'm doing all this, well, that's your job. That kind of messes with you a little bit because you don't want to ever feel taken advantage of by a friend, and you don't ever want to you don't ever want to feel like the friend is taking advantage of you. You don't want to feel mad at your friends. And I think all of that stuff can be avoided by having these relatively easy points addressed super early on in development and when you're getting ready to start out. Because communication is very important just in any sort of relationship, and it's just so important when you're dealing with something as stressful as actual game development. And it's important that you don't screw yourself over. It's important you don't get screwed over, all that stuff. And I actually think I went a little too fast. So, questions?
Yeah, and please go to the mic for questions.
There can be a lot of them.
Hello.
Hello.
My best friend is a huge fanboy of yours, and I was just wondering if you could maybe get a picture with you after this.
Sure. Absolutely. I love questions like that.
So one of my mentors gave me a piece of advice saying that one of the best things to do as an indie is to work with people outside of your medium. And one of my buddies is a poet in Toronto, and he's still in university, and we're trying to make it work. But his schooling usually gets in the way. And obviously you gotta have your priorities. But do you have any recommendations for that?
What's he going to be doing? Just a writer?
Working on a cyberpunk dating sim, and he's writing a lot of games in an environment similar to Twine.
Okay. Have you actually discussed any of?
We have a pretty good direction and everything. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of I don't know, creating some sort of structure or milestones that are reasonable. Although alternatively, like, there's always Christmas break, so we're thinking of maybe just like hashing out a first draft over the Christmas break and then slowly adding on to it on weekends, but...
Yeah, I mean, the important thing is that I don't know how many people you have in your team. Just two? Just you and him?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that should be easy to figure out because if he's like writing a whole bunch of stuff and you're kind of, I'm guessing, doing everything else, like that's a pretty easy thing to say, hey, I'm going to call him Paul. Hey, Paul, can we, I'm going to be doing this much. I know you're going to be doing this much. You have your school and everything. Can we get an agreement together where, like, this is how we split everything up? And, like, as far as milestones and stuff, I mean, I feel like you definitely don't want to, like, push him and make him drop out of school or anything to do that. So, like, if you can handle it on his schedule, since he's the one that's sort of, like, tied down, and plus your work is going to be more than his work, so you're going to stay busy longer than he is, so he can sort of drop in his stuff just as you kind of go.
To a certain degree, it's been kind of useful because I get to approach him and create a lot of the text so that it's geared towards his style of writing and what he's used to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
It can work out.
Thanks.
No problem.
Hi, I'm really excited to see you here. I watched the Indie Games movie before, and it was describing the process of creating Meat Boy. I know it was stressful, but it was a really big success.
Yeah.
My question is, are you going to create any more awesome games in the future?
Yeah, eventually. I don't know, like, we were working on a mobile Meat Boy, but that's kind of stalled. Because, like, life gets in the way. Oh, that was one of my things. Life gets in the way. So remember that. Yeah, like, Ed had a kid, so, like, congratulations to him and stuff, and that's awesome. But at the same time, work's kind of dead, so... I work on my own kind of stuff now, though, because he's got his Isaac stuff, and I have my Team Meat stuff, so, yeah.
Afterbirth came out yesterday.
Yeah, I know. I'm happy for him.
But yeah, you're going to keep us in the loop on...
Oh, of course. Once I have stuff to talk about. Yeah, we learned very... with Mugenics, we learned not to talk about it until it's ready. Because we talked about it like 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, and after 2 years of working on it, it was still not even close to being ready. So, yeah, once I have stuff to talk about, everybody will know.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hi.
Hello.
Do you find any differences or like things that should probably be addressed between like working in person versus working remotely with friends and stuff to look out for and whatnot?
Not really, see, because when Ed and I were working on Meat Boy, we didn't live in the same place. Like, I was in North Carolina, he was in California. I think that kind of just meshes in with just how people work. Like, it doesn't matter if somebody's 1,000 miles away or next to you. Like, if they're actual workers and they want to work, they'll get their work done. So, yeah, no, personally, I haven't found anything like making schedules or anything like that is helpful because it's not really doing anything more than what the person would be doing on their own. So
it's been my observation that one of the things that can really undermine the sort of trust-based relationships that are important in a small creative team is when one person within the team feels as though there's some like problem with the arrangement, even if it is, whether it's a defined arrangement or not. But and you've been kind of touching on this point throughout your talk, but they don't necessarily say anything. They might just be too timid and keep that to themselves. Like I was actually in that role in one past collaboration. And I guess I'm curious if you have any words on sort of rooting that out before it becomes like a deep-seated problem.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a broader relationship problem, is like when there is a problem, you have to speak up. There's no other way to do it because, like, if you're in a situation like that where somebody is not speaking up and somebody else is not aware of a problem, like the chances of this person becoming aware of the problem, like, hey, are you okay? Like, it doesn't really happen that way. So for, like, a person that's having that sort of problem, it's just like, in a way, you have to like elevate your own. This is easier said than done. You have to elevate your own self-worth to realize that you're worth talking about this sort of thing to make yourself feel better.
So I guess I feel as if I am like, it's no longer a problem for me needing to advocate myself. My concern now is like if I'm working with someone else.
Well, I mean,
like tease that out of them.
If you're, well, let's see. If you think you're a pretty empathetic person, and I feel like you are because you're actually asking this question now, which says a lot about your personality, where you actually don't want to like specifically marginalize somebody, you'll see it. Like, I don't think you'll have to tease it out because you'll be able to read the sort of emotions and the actions that a person is doing. So I think you'll be fine.
All right, so we have time for one more question.
Hey, Tommy.
Hey.
My wife and I have been arguing a lot about who's going to do the dishes, so I found your talk really inspirational.
Okay. You're very... I aim to please.
Yeah. My question is, you're advising, lawyering and getting written agreements, but lawyers are really expensive. And
sometimes.
Teams in the beginning cost a lot, or we don't have a lot of money in the beginning. How do you keep that under control?
Well, I mean, number one, there's like tons of free templates online that can do little things like, little agreements. But if you, like, a lot of us here, I feel we have decent amount of common sense. And I feel we can write a document that fully explains something, maybe not all the legal jargon or anything, but hey, you're gonna do this, these are your jobs, and for that you get this. Like, I don't know if you necessarily need a lawyer for that, like in the beginning, but if you have something drafted that you both agree to, and let's say you fall into another, like $120 that you can get a lawyer to look at it for an hour, I think it's worth it to have it there in the beginning and then just verify it later, because it doesn't need to be written by a lawyer in order for it to be followed, because it's just an agreement. And if it's on paper and you've both signed it, then it's like, well, you're both made aware of these conditions, this is what you agreed to, and then a lawyer is gonna go, yeah, okay, this makes sense, I can either rewrite it or this is cool, we can stick it on your like partnership agreement or whatever. So.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Tommy.